Hungary's economic model is slowly falling apart. The country is faced with record high inflation, a growing trade deficit, and a falling currency, such that Hungarians are reportedly now going abroad to Croatia to do their groceries. And the poor state of government finances has led the ratings agency Standard & Poor's to give Hungary the second worst credit rating in the European Union, on par with Romania and ahead only of Greece. Without friends in Europe or the United States to help out, Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban and his Foreign Minister have made repeated trips and openings to both Russia and China, in an effort to shore up the country's industry, economy, and public coffers. So why is Hungary slowly going bust, and can its economy be saved by Russia and China? Before we get into Hungary's economic problems, we have to understand how Hungary operated in the European Union and the global economy. You see, after the turmoil of the early post-communist years, during which Hungary underwent drastic economic shock therapy and privatized its economy, it emerged as an important base of operations for many international businesses. In other words, its economy became driven by foreign investment. European and in particular German industrialists poured cash into the country, owing to its cheap and skilled labor force, low energy prices thanks to nuclear power and gas from Russia, and later on thanks to its membership of the European Union. In many ways, Hungary became an extension of the German economy, a heavily industrialized country specialized on the automotive sector. BMW, Mercedes, and Volkswagen all set up shop and accounted for 2.5% of GDP output, with the whole automotive sector making up to 5% of GDP, if you include subsidiaries as well. And all of this represented 20% of all its exports. In fact, Hungary would develop a two-sided economy, with on the one hand export-oriented firms dominated by large multinationals, and on the other hand its domestic sector dominated by more local firms. At the same time, Hungary also followed a debt-driven development model, financing infrastructure projects with international loans, and as a result has traditionally had high levels of debt and ran large government deficits. This on its own isn't a problem. With good economic growth and accountable public servants, projects are built and loans can be paid off using the economic growth they help generate. Yet coupled with some of the economic mismanagement, like say corruption, that Hungary has, it can be a recipe for some pretty big problems, because this increases the vulnerability to external shocks, which could disrupt the continuous flow of cash the country needs to buy foreign goods. Especially considering that Hungary has struggled with its balance of trade, historically importing far more than it exports. It therefore needs a continuous flow of foreign cash, either in the form of foreign direct investment or debt, to finance its imports and stabilize its currency, the forint. In fact, if anyone should know this, it's Viktor Orban, who came to power in part as a result of the aftermath of the financial crisis, during which Hungary implemented severe austerity and received a bailout from the EU, IMF, and World Bank to stabilize its currency. And stabilized it was. Following a painful adjustment by his predecessors, Orban presided over an era of economic stability for Hungary between 2010 and 2018, which has in part contributed to his popularity. Hungary is a country that often comes under fire and praise from different parts of the media. To see what's been going on there recently and get all sides of the story, I've been using the app and website Ground News, and I'm excited to partner with them for today's video. Ground News is an innovative app and website that lets you compare coverage of thousands of articles worldwide. Let's look at this story on US visa restrictions for Hungarian passport holders. There's over 80 articles published on it, and we can see on the website that only 4% are owned by government sources. It's also interesting to see which countries are covering it with the map feature. I've been following topics like the economy in Hungary and the war in Ukraine to get news from sources I wouldn't normally check and avoid getting into an information bubble driven by mainstream algorithm. And if that sounds like something for you, you can read more at ground.news/intereurope to see where your news is coming from and to get a more rounded worldview. And to form a more rounded worldview, subscribe with the Intereurope link down below to enjoy unlimited access for 30% off. In a lot of ways, Hungary was able to piggyback on the German economy. With Germany's auto exports booming, Hungary, which was a key supplier and even manufacturer of those cars, benefited immensely, allowing cash to flow into the country. This allowed Hungary to solve its balance of payments problems, recording an 8-year-long trade surplus, plug its state budget deficit, which shrank to 1 to 2% of its GDP, and allowed it to keep its debt at a manageable level. In fact, this economic golden age helped Orban to secure a second and later third term in 2014 and 2018, thanks to both repeated pre-electoral caste purges and the economic stability he offered to Hungarians. Yet at the same time, Hungary was changing its institutions, empowered by a supermajority that has been renewed 4 times by the Hungarian electorate. And this would enable the development of crony capitalism, where politically connected businessmen would receive state contracts and subsidies, including some large EU subsidies which were given out in exchange for loyalty. Over time, larger and larger shares of the domestic Hungarian economy came under control of businessmen close to Viktor Orban and his political party Fidesz, which used political pressure to push business rivals to sell. But as long as the economy was performing relatively well during these golden years, people were content thanks to generous social policies and job opportunities, while the successful export sector was relatively protected from Fidesz's arguably sticky fingers. Yet this political economy would undermine the fundamentals that enabled Hungary to become an FDI powerhouse with American and European, particularly German money in several ways. First, they put Hungary on collision course with the European Union. The 11 constitutional rewrites between 2012 and 2022, which helped entrench Viktor Orban's control of the country, meant that Hungary was accused of undermining democracy and the rule of law. This would eventually result in Hungary being cut out from EU funding from 2021 onwards as part of the conditionality principle put in place by the European Union. This deprived Hungary, which received 25 billion euros in EU funding between 2014 and 2021, of a crucial source of foreign currency. At the same time, as Hungary's ruling party ran out of domestic businesses to take over and transfer to loyal businessmen, Hungary reportedly began pressuring foreign businesses to sell to Hungarian ones as well. At the same time, looking for alternative and additional sources of investment, Hungary turned to Russia and China to finance large infrastructure projects, where looser procurement practices would enable Hungary's business elite to profit as well. For example, the Chinese-funded Hungary-Serbia Railway is being built in collaboration with Hungarian businessmen close to Viktor Orban. Russian and Chinese banks investing in political projects would in turn translate into political influence on the country, especially in foreign policy. Hungary has repeatedly shot down EU resolutions condemning Russia and China and blocked EU aid to Ukraine. Some have even gone as far as calling Viktor Orban's Hungary a Trojan horse in NATO and the EU, and Hungary has also been called a hub of spies for Russia. And it's in this context that Hungary is facing 3 different shocks that are pushing it even deeper into both Russian and Chinese arms. First, Hungary is suffering from the difficulties of the German auto industry since 2018, which is being overtaken by Chinese manufacturers, which are dominating the production of electric vehicles. Difficulty in the German auto sector, the equivalent to Hungary's economic sugar daddy, has meant that Hungary's old balance of payments problems have re-emerged with a vengeance. Second, this has been compounded by the war in Ukraine, which has pushed up energy prices in Hungary, both for its consumers and industry, which are dependent on Russian oil and gas, which make up 80% of the country's consumption. This has widened the country's balance of trade deficit even further, but also put pressure on its industry, which is reportedly buying natural gas 5 to 6 times more expensively than consumers who benefit from state subsidies. And finally, the blocking of EU funding to Hungary has left a big gap in Hungary's budget at a time of high inflation and a cost of living crisis. As money continues to flow out of the country in the form of imports, with less money flowing in, Hungary's currency, the forint, has crashed, and it has looked to Russia and China for some much-needed relief and to buy time to fix its economy. Russia, which gave Hungary a loan to build a nuclear power plant, has deferred the payments of the loan to 2032, and allowed it to defer payments on natural gas as well. China's CATL, a battery manufacturer, announced a $7.6 billion battery plant in 2022. And it seems that this latest investment, on top of helping Hungary with its balance of payment deficit, is a part of a plan to help Hungary get out of the tricky situation by keeping its place as an automotive powerhouse. The battery investment by China is part of several plans, which, if completed, would see Hungary be the EU's 2nd largest battery producer. These batteries could then be integrated directly in Hungary's existing car factories and even in new Chinese FDI-driven projects, which could eventually kickstart its dwindling exports and plug its balance of trade. But it will take time for this plan to materialize, and the plans to start churning out batteries and electric vehicles. And that may be time Hungary doesn't have. Germany's auto industry is in freefall, which is cutting into Hungarian exports in the short term, before Hungary can transition to selling Chinese EVs and batteries. And so, not being able to take the full blow of an energy shock, Hungary has skipped out on the EU's Russian energy ban and cozied up to it in order to be able to delay payments on existing contracts. It has also looked to attract Chinese funding in other ways, like the now defunct Fudan University campus in Budapest, which would have been financed with a Chinese loan. But the easiest source of relief might be to mend ties with the EU by backing down from its rule of law dispute to unlock much needed foreign currency. But for a government that has based much of its platform on standing up to Brussels, that move would be politically unacceptable. So the Hungarian economy is facing a triple crisis. One political, with its confrontation with the European Union over rule of law, one economic, with the freefall of the German auto industry, on which it built much of its industrial success, and another geopolitical, with the rupture of the West and Russia over the latter's invasion of Ukraine. These crises have seen Hungary choose to balance its relations with Russia, its energy provider, and China, which it sees as its future guarantor of industrial might. But what do you think? Will Hungary be able to navigate these three crises and save its economy, or will it fail? This was Interrupt. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, make sure to check out this video on the reconstruction of Ukraine or this video on Europe's night train hype.